If the threat facing the galaxy in the New Jedi Order series was an external force in the form of the Yuuzhan Vong, the threat facing the galaxy in the Legacy of the Force series is an internal one. From the very beginning of brainstorming, the three authors decided that what the galaxy would be facing in this series was the threat of civil war, that systems within the Galactic Alliance would want independence, and that would balloon out into a huge conflict. The first book in the series, Betrayal by Aaron Alston, introduces that element with a rebellious system in the form of Corellia. Makes sense. Corellians don't like being told what to do. Legacy of the Force Betrayal ultimately made it to number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of June 18th, 2006. I honestly don't have very many memories of Betrayal. Since it came out in the summer of 2006, no doubt I got it from the library while I was on summer break from university, but there was a lot of things here that caught me by surprise. I feel like I knew the overarching plot, but as with a lot of these rereads, I really didn't remember any of the details here. So, a brief summary. When a routine mission to Adumar ends with Jedi Knight Jacen Solo and his apprentice Ben Skywalker narrowly escaping with their lives, it's just another piece of evidence that a growing number of planets are dissatisfied with the Galactic Alliance and its push towards centralization. But while events escalate to a boiling point on the planet of Corellia, Jacen Solo begins a journey of his own that threatens to send him down a dark path. So Betrayal has to do a lot of heavy lifting here to set up the Legacy of the Force series. I would maybe argue it's trying to do too much, but let's save that for the issues section. As the novel opens, Luke Skywalker has been having visions of a man who doesn't exist. Jacen Solo and Ben Skywalker, as I said in the summary, uncover evidence of illegal missile factories on Adumar, which suggests that Adumar is selling weapons to planets and they don't want the Galactic Alliance to know about it. At the same time, the Galactic Alliance, since the end of the New Jedi Order, has swallowed up the Empire, and there's some, weird sentiments about that involved. And Corellia is pushing for independence from Galactic Alliance, that they don't want to be interfered with, and Han, being a Corellian, is sort of conflicted about how he should feel here. Should he side with his home planet? He doesn't really want to side with the Galactic Alliance, but also... So Han and Leia end up going to Corellia, trying to calm matters down behind the scenes a little. The Galactic Alliance ends up sending Jedi forces and military forces to try to get Corellia to stand down, and that goes horribly awry. Most of the Jedi teams, their missions are a complete failure. They attempt to kidnap the leader of the 5 different planets of the Corellian system, as well as Thrak and Syal Solo, who's clawed his way back to being the chief of state of Corellia, and those missions fail, but Jacen Solo and Ben Skywalker's mission of making sure that the Center Point Station is not operational again does succeed. And the Galactic Alliance military ends up entrenched on the world of Tralis. An attempt at diplomacy fails as the leader of the 5 Corellian planets is assassinated, and a weird tassel message thing is left behind. Most of the Jedi return to Corellia except for Jacen and Ben, who head off to uncover what the meaning of this tassel. The conflict on Tralis culminates in basically the Galactic Alliance having to withdraw, but the Corellians not wiping out huge number of civilians as was originally their plan. And Jacen meets a woman named Brisha Syo, who tells him a lot of interesting things that will have huge repercussions for the rest of the series. So whereas the Dark Nest trilogy really focused heavily on Han, Leia, and Luke, I found Betrayal interesting in that I felt that Luke and Mara took a backseat to the narrative, and it was more focused on Han and Leia's story, Jacen and Ben's story, and then to a lesser degree, Wedge and Wedge's daughter Syal Antilles and what was going on with them. Luke is having visions of someone who's not there, someone who doesn't exist. It's implied at the end that he's been seeing Jacen, the path that Jacen goes down, but I think I remember it also being explained away that he is seeing the villain of the Legacy comics, which are set generations after these books. I was a little surprised that Luke was so, if not gung-ho, unreservedly going along with what the Galactic Alliance military had planned, because I thought that one of the things that he was always struggling with, especially in the New Jedi Order onwards, was the Jedi being tools of the Galactic Alliance, and to what extent should they be independent and to what extent they should be part of it. But I'm going to give Alston the benefit of the doubt and say this was probably covered in later books. But at the same time, I was so surprised that we just have Jedi being assigned to kidnap heads of state, and really the only person who expresses dismay with it is like a PR person for the Galactic Alliance, and everyone else is like, well, it's something we have to do. And I was like, whoa, but that is like a big step. It's been 4 years since the end of the Dark Nest trilogy, but Jaina and Zek still have this connection. It's not what it was at the time of the Dark Nest trilogy when they were all part of that Killick hive mind, but they still have this connection, and Jaina thinks they're just platonic friends, and Han's like, I don't know, Zek, and so I wish we could have gotten more with Jaina. She's basically just here doing her job, being frustrated at orders, and then towards the end, Han sees her in the battle, and Leia was like, keep an eye out for her, and he realizes she's a great pilot. I don't have to do that. And I'm hopeful that Jaina will get more to do in these books, although I remember before I gave up being disappointed with how Jaina's story played out. I've said this in the New Jedi Order books, but I feel like of the Solo kids, she's really the one that gets the least fleshed out, that other than anomalies like Dark Journey, she's just more of a background character than I would like for Han and Leia's child. Wedge is here. Wedge is captured, I suppose, imprisoned as part of their plan to kidnap the heads of state. They ask Wedge to come in because they have some questions about something from all the way back to the Coruscant mission that occurred in Wedge's gamble, but that's a lie, and they just want to imprison him so he can't be there while they're trying to deal with the Corellian system. And Wedge being Wedge, he escapes. He runs into his daughter, who has joined the Galactic Alliance military under a pseudonym so that she's not judged by her father's legacy. She almost shoots him down. They have a conversation. And then we jump to Wedge's now being a liaison between Thrak and Syal Solo and the head of all the 5 planets, Saxon, which I would have loved some explanation for that. We get a little bit when he gets to talk to Tycho at the beginning of that diplomatic mission, but it's just sort of presented as a fait accompli, and I would have liked to get maybe Wedge's reasoning in the moment behind it. And then Wedge basically is there to try to make sure that Thraken doesn't just kill a bunch of civilians, go for the worst possible option. When the Corellians originally decide that they want to take Tralis back, Thraken's plan is just to bomb everything and cause huge casualties, and it's Wedge who has a plan to minimize the casualties, to try to take it back in a way that won't ensure that the Corellians have to fight against the Galactic Alliance, because if the Corellians take back Trellis in a way that kills thousands of its occupants, then they're almost guaranteed to have to continue this conflict with the Galactic Alliance. Wedge's daughter is here. She's listed in the Dramatis Personae twice, perhaps because going into the story, Alston didn't want you to know that Lysa Dunter is Syal Antilles, but her identity is found out because someone being paid by Thrak and Jacen Solo tries to suborn her, and she shoots him. And then her identity comes out that she's really Wedge Antilles' oldest daughter. She gets pulled out of her squadron because her squadron leader is a jerk, and she ends up flying this experimental ship, which, while reading it, I really wanted a picture of it because it's described as like a TIE fighter cockpit, but then with these wings, and people call them twees because they look like Twi'leks. But I think the most focus on any Corellian character is on Han, and then because she's married to him, even though she's Alderaanian, Leia. We first get a hint of all this Corellian stuff going on when Han and Leia have a housewarming party for their new apartment on Coruscant. Their family comes, and of course it devolves into an argument about the things going on Corellia. Han does not think that the Galactic Alliance should get involved. He's upset that the Jedi are doing the bidding of the Galactic Alliance. So he and Leia do a little bit of digging, figure out that, yeah, there's definitely something going on there. So Han and Leia head to Corellia, they meet with Saxon, and they end up trying to bridge those two divides. Like, how can they help Corellia not have the Galactic Alliance know about it because then they get in a lot of trouble, keep their family safe, and it's a hard tightrope to walk. During the final battle, I guess, when the Corellian forces retake Tralis, Leia is on the flagship of the Galactic Alliance fleet, and she's basically just there because she wants to ensure that nothing happens to Han. And she realizes afterwards that what she did put other people at risk, and she's not comfortable doing that again. That she was so focused on keeping Han safe that there were basically innocent Galactic Alliance pilots who died as a result. And I think part of Leia's conflict here is that she is now a Jedi Knight, so she's considered part of the Jedi Order, but in doing what she and Han were trying to do, she's doing something outside of the Jedi Order, something that they haven't officially condoned, and I'll be interested to see if that has consequences going forward. But I feel like the focus of this book, not just because he's on the cover, but because this is the beginning of his journey, his story for these books, is definitely Jacen Solo. It seems that after the Yuuzhan Vong War, as we saw in the Darkness trilogy and then we see here, Jacen has lost a lot of his empathy. I think that was something I appreciate about his character in the New Jedi Order books, was that even though his dithering and his philosophy frustrated me so much at times, there was this basic human empathy that he had for others. I think as a child, this comes across best in his connection with animals, how he wants to nurture and support and grow. That maybe because of all his philosophizing, that Jacen had this ability to connect with people, to help them talk through things, and that's all gone here. It seems like in wanting to avoid war and wanting to avoid something like the Yuuzhan Vong invasion from ever happening again, that Jacen doesn't see people as people anymore. That he feels some remorse in killing people when they're getting out of the ambush on Adumar, but not really. It's almost as though if you're not a Jedi, if you're not part of his immediate family, like, he doesn't care about you anymore. And it's just such a sad development that he went on this 5-year journey of knowledge and discovery, and he's come away from it as a colder person. Even Ben says at one point to his parents, and he's like, Jacen's cold, and they were like, oh, well, I'm sure you just mean that when he meditates and he withdraws into the Force. But no, that's what it is. It's almost like now for Jacen, if the ends justify the means, he's willing to do it, even if innocent people die. He can explain it away as, well, only 3 died, and if I hadn't done that, 200 would have died, so I'm good. He definitely comes across in Betrayal as this dark and brooding figure. And that does make me sad how the goofy kid we saw in the Young Jedi Knights books was completely gone by the time of the New Jedi Order, and now by the time of the Legacy of the Force, while that goofiness is long gone, the sympathy for others is also disappeared in the intervening years. And so the tassel that is left behind after that failed diplomatic solution is key to drawing Jacen to the planet of Lord, where he can be put into these situations where Brisha Syo can evaluate how he judges situations and how he responds to them, and then draw him from there to her secluded hideaway to try to deliver some more personal information to him. The tassel first catches his attention because of all the different things that it says. The first one that is translated, he feels like is talking directly to him. It says, he will strengthen himself through pain, and that makes him think of his events in the book Traitor, where his time in the embrace of pain taught him to push through that. And then the other meanings of the tassels as well, I don't know, I'll put like a list of all of them here, also seem to relate to Jacen, but also, especially one of them, is really like a Sith guideline. And so they meet up with Brisha Syo, who has the shuttle that was involved in that assassination attempt, and she's like, I can deliver you knowledge, but you must come to my home. And it's this asteroid near Bimiel. They go there, and it turns out that Brisha Syo is actually the Dark Lady Lumiya, who appeared in the Star Wars Marvel comics that were released between 1977 and 1986. Lumiya was originally a young woman named Shira Bree, who joined the Rebel Alliance as a pilot, had a sort of romance with Luke Skywalker, and then he accidentally shot her down because the Force said that she was an enemy. And it turned out that she had been an Imperial spy. After she was shot down, she was saved by the use of cybernetics and trained in the dark side of the Force by Darth Vader, and she became Lumiya. And she has a very distinctive outfit, and she doesn't use a lightsaber, she uses a light whip. And so Lumiya basically says that Vergere, Jacen's sort of mentor in the New Jedi Order books, who captured him, turned him over to the Yuuzhan Vong, tortured him, revealed a lot about the Force, helped him escape, and then sacrificed herself to save him in Destiny's Way, was actually a Sith. And she was a Sith all along. And that Jacen is fated to become a Sith, and he's going to do great things, and he's going to save the galaxy, and blah, 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 blah. And I don't know about other readers, but this felt like a huge retcon to me. In digging into the Essential Reader's Companion, which is really great, it doesn't just put the stories in chronological order, but it has a lot of background information that you wouldn't find out any other way. I found out that apparently in planning the Legacy of the Force series, Troy Denning wrote a 27-page document called the Vergere Compendium, in which he listed all the ways that what she said implied that she was a Sith. And that is certainly an interpretation. I'm not sure if it's an interpretation that I believe myself personally, because while Vergere did terrible things, she's always felt more like a gray figure to me, and I think that interpreting her as a Sith and her actions as an attempt to transform Jacen into a Sith is imposing an interpretation on the events of the New Jedi Order that I do not think James Luceno and Matthew Stover and Walter John Williams intended. But, you know, that's what happens as stories progress. Things get reinterpreted and retconned and changed, and I may not like it. I may think it makes more sense that Lumiya is lying to Jacen, that she is giving him events from a certain point of view to push him towards a certain thing, but also I know that, like, that's not what the authors intended here. Basically, Lumiya tells Jacen that Sith don't have to be like cackling maniacal psychopaths, that the Sith who made this hideaway in the asteroid Darth Vectivus, that he was a Sith, but he never became like a Sidious type, and that some Sith strengthen themselves through pain and sacrifice, and that seems to be what she's pushing Jacen towards. And Jacen is surprisingly receptive to her ideas, to the point that when he realizes that the young Jedi who accompanied him and Ben Skywalker from Lord to this asteroid, Nolani Din, would tell Luke what happened here and that can't happen and that he sees all these bad outcomes and which one of them dies, and so she needs to die. So he kills Nolani and he wipes Ben's memories of everything that happened here. So Jacen is definitely started down a dark path. He's not a Sith at this point, but he is seriously considering elements of Sith philosophy, which ain't good. So my first quibble on the issues front, this isn't a big one, that's why I said quibble, is more of an editing problem. I was surprised by the number of errors here that I would have expected an editor to catch. There were several times where Syal Antilles' pseudonym Lysa Dunter was given as Lysa Duntun. Another key one is that when they originally planning this story, they meant for Betrayal to be set 37 years after the Battle of Yavin, which would place it only a year after the Swarm War. But instead, they decided to move it to 40 years after the Battle of Yavin, but with the end result that some of the timeline stuff doesn't quite work. Zek is described as younger than he should be, and Nolani, the Jedi that Jacen and Ben encounter on Lord, says that Jacen taught her lightsaber combat about 7 years ago. But that would place that teaching period into the time that Jacen was traveling the galaxy, learning about Force traditions, and no one was able to contact him. My second issue is a bigger one. I hinted at it in the beginning, but I think that Betrayal is trying to do too much here. Not only are we setting up Jacen's journey towards learning about the Sith and starting to fall down that path, it also needs to set up this conflict between the Galactic Alliance and Corellia, which will spiral out to other systems. And that's a lot to do. It's basically the book starts and we're like, well, Corellia's very unhappy about the Galactic Alliance. And then before we know it, the Galactic Alliance has military forces there. They've sent in the Jedi to kidnap heads of state. They need to destroy or turn off Centerpoint Station because Syal Solo has got it functioning again. And this is one bit where I maybe would have liked to see hints of this in the Dark Nest trilogy. I know that the Dark Nest trilogy is all about that Killik conflict in the unknown regions, and it's set 4 to 5 years before this novel, but this is one bit where I feel like it would have helped to have this built up instead of just jumping into the conflict we've been told that is brewing behind the scenes and then everything explodes. To refer all the way back to books in the Bantam era in the 1990s, I wasn't super impressed by the Corellian trilogy by Roger McBride Allen because I felt like that book had a lot of filler. But that is one story where Corellia is upset and they want independence. Well, not just independence, they sort of want to take stuff over. Again, Thraken, just garbage man. Or rather, Thraken, garbage man controlled by these nebulous forces in outer parts of the Corellian system. But in that one, Han and Leia come to Corellia with their kids for a diplomatic function, and they can see how the atmosphere and the vibe there is just really dangerous and boiling to something. And then in the second book and the third book, we have those events happen, that they turn on that interdiction field with Centerpoint Station, and there's a big battle, even though it was an underwhelming battle. And I guess essentially that's what I would have liked, to see more of those simmering tensions before the conflict boils over the pot. And finally, this wouldn't be an Aaron Alston book without bits of humor. But this was one bit where I felt like at times the bits of humor didn't fit with the overall tone of the story. Some of the humor that Alston interjected I thought worked really well, like the dynamic between Wedge and Han. But we might have other bits, like all those situations that Brisha Syo put in place for Jacen, and some of them just felt like they were played a little too lightly for me, especially the hostage situation in the aquarium. I felt like sometimes Jacen was deadpanning and making snarky comments when I did not think it was appropriate. So, in short, Betrayal introduces a lot of things for later books in the Legacy of the Force series to pick up on. We don't just have the beginning of the Civil War conflict between the Galactic Alliance and some of its member systems, but also this downwards path that Jacen is started on, that the Dark Lady Lumiya pushes him towards Sith reasoning and Sith actions that he's going to pursue in later stories. And there are big revelations about Vergere that will have ramifications on everything to come, although your mileage may vary. What you think of those? I do think that Betrayal at times was trying to do too much, that in trying to set up both Jacen's downfall and this galactic-wide conflict, that there was maybe too much exposition, too much dropping us into a conflict and telling us it's been simmering below the surface for a long time without actually showing us this. Still, I thought it was very interesting revisiting Betrayal after all these years. And next time, I'm going to be reading the second book in the Legacy of the Force series, Bloodlines by Karen Traviss.